Okay, let's get started. So look at this beautiful poster that Kevin has made, right? So my name is Shan Bao. I'm a faculty member from University of Michigan with joint appointment with Mcity and Dearborn, as well as the CE department. So today, I think between my talk and your dinner, right? So you are judging, whether you will spend this hour worth your time. I want to say yes, because this research actually is relevant to everyone here, because everyone is a vulnerable road user. Even you are not cyclist, but you are definitely pedestrian. So today I will talk about the title of my presentation is the safety of the vulnerable road user, a data-driven examination. So this set of work actually is funded by CCAT, Toyota, CSRC, as well as Mcity. So the first definition I want to clarify is vulnerable road user. So how many of you in the audience here today know the definition of vulnerable road user? Raise your hand. Yes, majority, right? So everyone is a vulnerable road user. So based on the official definition, vulnerable road user refers to that describe those unprotected group by an outside shield, right? As they have a greater risk of injury or fatality in any crashes with a vehicle. So this is the definition of VRU. So if you look at the breakdown of the VRU, right? So we have pedestrians, we have cyclists, we have moped riders. We also have the motorcyclists. Actually, also they belong to the VRU group. So here is I have this. Here we go. This is the recent work of my group that we have published the work related to all the things, safety issues and methodologies to examine the safety problems associated with the VRUs. So if anyone of you are interested in more of the details or want a copy of that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share a copy of all the publications with you. So then the next question I want to tackle here is that, okay, we understand what is VRU. So what is that exactly is the problem associated with VRU on the road, right? What is the size of the problem? So let's just look at the data. So this is actually the previous 15 years of NHTSA released FARS data. So the gray bar represents the total fatalities starting from year 2006 to 2020. You can see we had some good years with the total fatalities actually decreasing. And but if you look at the blue, greenish chart, that represents the total fatalities of the pedestrians on the road. So even during the good years that we have decreasing of total fatalities on the road, but the total fatality of pedestrians is still increasing across all the 15 years. So then you would be wondering, what is the big chunk here? So that is actually the new data just released yesterday by NHTSA. So that's the fatality data in 2021. Actually, I want to thank Hui Zhong, who basically helped me to plot this chart. So you look at since the start of the pandemic, everything seems becoming worse, right? In terms of total fatalities on the road, as well as the total fatalities of the pedestrian. However, if you look at the size of the problem, you will see that from year 2020 to 2021, the total fatality on the road has increased about 10.6%. But the total pedestrian fatality actually increased even more, which is about 13.4%. So the problem, the safety issues related to pedestrians, right, VRUs, actually has become an increasing society problems over all the years. So we got to do something, right? As a transportation engineer, safety guy, we have a big space to work to tackle this problem. So today I would take on behalf of my research team members that I will talk about two studies actually, which are both ongoing. The first study is sponsored by Toyota CSRC in collaborating with Rini Shironi. So we actually use a hybrid of methodology to look at the problem of what exactly going on with the VRUs, including pedestrians and cyclists on the road. What's the typical crash scenario with them? What's the increasing trend? And what is the significant contributing factors? And how we can define basically what are the corner cases of those scenarios. So the objectives. Basically, we are going to develop a framework to identify safety critical use cases, namely corner cases related to VRU safety, including both pedestrians and cyclists. So there are three main research questions that will be addressed in this ongoing study. So the first is understand the context and the causation factors related to VRU-involved crashes. The second goal is basically to conduct analysis and examine the parameters of those use cases under a naturalistic driving condition or road environment. So then the third is basically we are going to generate a library of all those use cases and share on online platform with the public so people can basically access to that and do some online testing. So this is the workflow. So we'll start with crash data analysis, literature review, as well as naturalistic driving study data analysis to identify those use cases. So then we'll propose a framework how to go with all these huge data sets to deliver to basically extract, identify those corner cases. And then we'll conduct additional advanced data analysis to identify those significant contributing factors. So then we'll basically conduct online virtual environment simulation and modeling work. So I call this is a nice distribution of the past 5 years of fatal crash data. So we basically broke down all the categories involved in these fatal crashes on the US road, right? Starting from pedestrian and the cyclist and the driver, as well as the vehicle passengers. So then we also plotted basically the distribution or number of fatalities involved in the crashes with either a sedan car or SUV or truck. So just for example, so in the past 5 years, total there's about 26,000 of pedestrians were killed on the US road, right? So if you look at this chart, you will see, about half of them actually occurred during the crashes with the sedan cars. That it's kind of a similar proportion related to cyclists. So during the past 5 years, a total of about 3,500 of cyclists who were killed on the public roads, while about half of them occurred during the crashes with sedan passenger vehicles. So these breakdown can give us basically a big picture and some detail related to what exactly going on. So then we can go deeper looking into the specific scenarios in terms of a crash type. So here's a brief summary of what's going on in terms of the crashes involving pedestrians. So by looking both NHTSA FARS data representing the fatal accident reporting system and the CRSS representing the crash report sampling system. So we look at the past 5 years data, right? As I mentioned, because the 2021 data just released yesterday, that's why it was not included in the reporting today, but in the future we'll add that back on. So pedestrian crashes, we found that mostly during urban scenarios, which is about accounts for about 75%, which is not surprising, right? Because pedestrians mostly in the urban areas. But rural areas actually has also significant concerns. Why? Because of the driving speed, which I will point out later. So we also found pedestrian crashes are most common in dark than during the daylight. And weekday crashes are mostly between 6 to 9 p.m. Weekend crashes are between 6 to 9 p.m. as well. So in terms of the pre-crash vehicle actions, we actually found that vehicle going straight, half of the cases occurred while the crashes with pedestrians is basically relevant to vehicle going straight, not making any turns. So we also found that pedestrians, like majority, more than half of the pedestrian cases were crossing the road. So later on, I will draw the conclusion that actually the number one fatal crash scenario for pedestrians is basically the pedestrian try to do mid-block jaywalking, crossing the road, not by the crosswalks, while the vehicle going straight. So that's the number one crash scenario for pedestrians, fatal. So by looking all those, right, we want to know more. With all the details, what exactly the context and the situations associated with all those different typical crash scenarios involving pedestrians, especially leading to fatal consequences. So this is a busy table. Don't worry, I'm not trying to test your eyesight. But the busy table actually just contains a lot of information, which later on in my following slides, I will show you more dive in, more pretty easier to read table and charts. So here we have, this table have 3 columns. So the first column right here is basically representing the wearables that you can identify from FARS data as well as the CRSS data that are hosted by NHTSA in terms of the vehicle maneuvers, pedestrian behavior, their location, weather condition, road condition, and number of lanes, and is it daylight or dark, whether dark with light, dark without light. So the second column here is our summary in terms of just for pedestrians specifically. In the injury-only crashes, what is the most leading scenario as compared to the fatal crashes involving pedestrians, what is the leading percentage? So for example, for the pre-event vehicle movement, we found that in the injury crashes involving pedestrians, about 50% of the vehicle going straight, while during the fatal crashes involving pedestrians, it's actually almost nearly 80% that the cases happened when the vehicle were going straight. So then you look at basically the lighting condition. During the injury crashes involving pedestrians, we found actually about 56% is during daylight for injury crashes involving pedestrians, while for the fatal crashes, we found about 74% of the fatal crashes involving pedestrians actually occurred during dark condition and without lights. So this is a very strong data to show you what's going on over there. So similarly, the third column of the table shows you what's going on with the cyclists that we can identify from the crash data. So I will explain to you in the following slide. So here is a more variable that we can find from the FARS and the CRSS data in terms of vehicle actions, behavior of the driver, as well as the pedestrian behavior. For example, in terms of the crash type, for injury crashes involving the pedestrians, we found that the driver, which is a motorist left turn, basically parallel path, accounts about 18%, while for fatal crashes, actually pedestrian fail to yield accounts for about 33%. So by looking all these numbers, you get a sense what's going on during all those crashes, right? Which led to all those unfortunate consequences. So let's look basically individual, case by case. For example, for this chart, it represented the location. The vehicle maneuver. So involving pedestrian crashes that we found the majority of the vehicle were going straight before the crash occurred. And we also observed a higher proportion of injury crashes occurred after turning left. So basically you can see from color-coded with the yellow here is about 50% representing the vehicle going straight, represented in the injury crashes involving pedestrians, and a way higher percentage is about almost 80% in the fatal crashes. Again, here is relevant to bicyclists. We also look at both data sets. So in the bicycle-related crashes, so we found the majority of the vehicles were going straight. So in injury accounts about 41%, while for the fatal crashes, it also accounts nearly 80%, which is very similar to the pedestrians crashes. So let's look at basically the time of a year, what's going on with those pedestrian crashes and cyclists. So here we basically plotted all those fatality frequencies from January all the way to the December. So you can see more injury pedestrian vehicle crashes occurred in the month of October, while the fatal pedestrian vehicle crashes mostly occurred between October and December. So this is again the basically the data for the cyclist, the bicyclist. So the majority injuries, bicycle vehicle crashes occurred during August and September. Not surprising, because that's a typical riding season for cyclists. And the more fatal cyclist vehicle crashes occurred from July to August. So you can see there are some similarities between the crashes involving cyclists and the crashes involving pedestrians, but definitely you can see clear they also have different patterns and context as well. So that's why we need to study them separately. So this is, again, is in terms of the occurring time. So we found that for the crashes involving pedestrians, we found that injury crashes mostly occurred between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m. And the fatal pedestrian crashes mostly occurred from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., which is basically consistent with our findings that typically occur during the dark time, especially on the locations, during the locations without lighting. So this is the data for the bicyclist. We found that the injury bicycle vehicle crashes mostly occurred between 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the fatal crashes involving bicyclists typically occur from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. So again, so this is the lighting condition, as I mentioned before. So this is the lighting condition. You can see that for injury crashes, basically involving pedestrians, so their majority occurred during daylight. However, for the fatal crashes involving pedestrians, there is the biggest chunk occurred during the dark time. So that tells us something related to the context and the causation of the crashes, right? So this is again the data related to the bicyclists. Similarly, we also found that for the injury crashes only involving bicyclists, that majority, about 76%, occurred during daytime, while the fatal crashes involving the cyclists actually has quite a chunk during the dark time as well. So this is again is the intersection related. So I want to point this out because that will conclude some of our leading crash scenarios involving pedestrians as well as leading to cyclists. So as you can see, for the injury crashes involving pedestrians, so basically the injury crashes happened mostly at the intersection related area. However, the fatal crashes actually happened mostly at non-intersection related. Actually, while we're looking more detail related to this, we found that number one fatal crash scenario involving pedestrian is a mid-block while the pedestrian tried to cross the roadway illegally. So that's the number one fatal crash involving pedestrians. So then let's look at the data related to the bicyclist. So for the injury crashes, basically, again, they mostly occur at the intersection related area. However, for the fatal crashes, very similar to the pedestrian crashes, majority of the fatal crashes actually also occurred at the non-intersection related area. Actually, we found that the number one fatal crash involving cyclists is basically the car was behind the cyclist and tried to overtake the cyclist because there's a huge speed differences. So that's the number one leading fatal crash involving cyclist is the overtaking maneuver. So we have like 200 slides of that. You don't want to hear about that, right? So basically, just to show you that we have done a phenomenal, exhaustive work examining the crash data, including both the fatal crash data as well as the injury crash data, to understand what exactly the context and the situations. So by moving forward, we did all this descriptive analysis. We also want to basically bring out the statistical evidence to show what are the significant contributing factors related to the injury severity, more specifically fatal crashes versus non-fatal crashes. So we have run a set of statistical analysis, including logistical regression models, to look at basically for this specific study. Actually, we have the abstract accepted and the current due paper is under review to look at for the specific population of a child pedestrian, which is a super vulnerable population, right? So for these children on the road, we want to do more to protect them. So we are interested in understanding what are the significant contributing factors related to the children fatality on the road. So we ran a bunch of logistical regression models and found that there's quite a lot of variables associated with the severity of the injury levels of those children. For example, we found that crashes occurred in dark and unlighted conditions were associated with a significant higher likelihood of more severe injury outcomes than the daylight crashes for the children pedestrians. We also found that the crashes, if there is some children pedestrian behavior failed to yield, for example, dash into the street without parents, they also associated with a significant higher odds ratio of being severely injured during the crashes, because you could imagine there is a very little response time, right, for the driver to make reactions. And we found that the crashes occurring in the presence of regularly signs such as the stop signs and the yield signs actually found that can be helpful. They actually associate with a much lower odds of basically leading to more severe injuries for child pedestrians. So this is just want to show you some of the examples that the work we are doing. So we have done a lot of crash analysis in terms of descriptive analysis, statistical analysis. So those are all very useful, and we want to do more. So here, we actually want to do more theoretical contribution to the society, right? So we are aiming to develop a conceptual framework that by looking all these crash data, huge number of crash data, all like dynamic, or many complicated variables, dimension channels, can we develop a framework so that the researchers can get a systematic way driving from the data to look at what are the corner cases, which is a difficult cases for the human drivers, as well as for the drivers like automated vehicle drivers even. So basically, we take this opportunity in this project. We actually use a hybrid methodology and developed a multi-steps framework to define crash scenario typology. To first identify typical crash scenarios. So that includes categorize VRU crashes into different crash scenario types, and also from a behavior perspective as well, because by looking at the behavior level, that can help our OEMs and technology developers to understand how they can basically generate the countermeasures to prevent such behavior happening, or warning the driver or even the vehicle, automated vehicle. So then the second is basically we are trying to describe the context of the identified crash scenarios. So both the typical and overrepresented behavior, environmental, and vehicle conditions associated with a specific identified crash scenario. So that basically from all those dimensions, you put all these crash scenario together. So then basically when the OEMs, researchers look at basically from the vehicle side what they can do, then for policy making from the environmental design development what they can do, and from the human factors perspective how we can develop more advanced warning system to help with the different dimensions. So based on the crash database, again, it's the FARS as well as the CRSS. So then later on, I will introduce, and basically we also take the advantage of the Omnitrix existing huge naturalistic driving study data to validate as well as to basically extract more cases. So in this first step to basically to identify the crash scenario, what we did is basically first we selected appropriate data elements to categorize VRU relevant cases. For example, is it pedestrian related, or even more deeper, is a child pedestrian related, or child occupants inside the vehicle related. Or is a cyclist related. So then we look at those. Basically, we also look at the first harmful event. Again, those are the standard variables in the FARS data as well as the CRSS data, mostly pedestrian related. So then we found the critical event basically is the pre-crash scenarios, vehicle maneuvers, as well as the pedestrian behaviors. So then we reviewed both data sets and categorize them into the 10 categories, which are listed right here. So including case structure, crash consequences, driver characteristics, driver behavior and status, environmental and roadway event, vehicle characteristics, vehicle status, and VRU characteristics. So these are all basically reported by previous work, literature, as well as our own work that are very relevant to those type of crashes. So then basically, we checked the data elements in the blue shaded categories against the 3 exclusion criteria. So to basically, we are not going to look at those data if they are not available in FARS as well as in the CRS from the period of 2016 to 2020. The second exclusion criteria is basically if the data set has insufficient information to distinguish among the child crashes, for example, that we're not gonna look at that. And also the third criteria is basically not suitable for a crash scenario typology development. So by looking all those, so then we also basically included the main variable category. It's called NMCC, which is called the non-motorist contributing factors. It's basically something that from the VRU behavior related. So that by looking at that dimension, we can understand that the intention as well as the maneuver of the VRUs during or even pre the crash. So as a second step, so we then basically started a crash context description. We look at the typical status in terms of the most frequent observed element, as well as we look at the overrepresented elements in those data sets. Just give you a really comprehensive overview of the data sets as well as the representatives. So then basically by looking the data elements used in the context description, we put the driver condition, whether the driver is distracted or impaired, as well as the characteristic or status of the involved entities like driver behavior status, VRU characteristics, VRU behavior, all those relevant dimensions putting all together to describe the typical crash scenario as well as the corner case of the crash scenario involving VRUs. So it's a very rich basically turnout and outcome. So I want to show you a case study of how we actually applied this methodology framework of deriving basically the crash scenarios. So we start with the FARS data, the previous 5 years of FARS data. We are looking at the child VRU involved in the fatal crashes. So we have 4 categories, right? Like one vehicle crash into one fatal child, or when vehicle versus multiple child pedestrians, or multiple pedestrians, child pedestrian versus multiple vehicles, as well as one child involved with multiple vehicles. So then you can, by categorizing this, you have a systematic way, very clear. You have the following step. It's basically you look at, for example, we start with one vehicle versus one child. So then you have the person type, right? Pedestrians, then you can count how many cases are there. Then you further look at the NMCC conditions. So for example, it's like whether the child behavior is dashing out in the street, or is they fail to yield to the roadway, or they have the in-roadway playing improperly. So then gives you all the conditions that you can have all the categories look at the environmental, vehicle situation, and also driver perspective to match with the scenario that this framework will be deriving. So here. So then, basically, this is one of the results from the case study. We look at the context, basically involving the driver. So if you look at one vehicle versus one child pedestrian, what typically characteristics of the driver that you can derive from the crash data? So basically, we found that the driver adverse condition, whether basically there is a violation charged, whether they are distracted or impaired, or their vision being blocked, for example, by parked cars or building or trees. So typically we found that no driver adverse condition noted for the top 5 scenarios. We also basically shared the top 5 scenarios involving one vehicle and one children pedestrian during the fatal crashes. So basically that we found that typically driver were not found very guilty for this case. And we also found that basically the pedestrians darting out or play in the street were marked in those top 5 scenarios. So in the conclusion for the driver characteristics, we found that mostly observed with younger male drivers, defined as 35 years or younger, and going straight, not at intersection, and not noted for driver level related factors. So this is basically the main characteristics for drivers involving one vehicle crashes with one child pedestrians. So again, these are the characteristics associated with the child pedestrians involving the one vehicle crashes with one child pedestrians. We basically found that the conditions with the high observed proportions, like a failure to yield right away, we also have a lot of non-noted as well. So we found that a 13 to 14 years old child and crossing the roadway were the typical characteristics for the pedestrian side of the story. So we are also interested to look at the environmental roadway characteristics during such crash scenarios, right? So it typically in a clear daylight, not surprising, and on a two-way, two-lane straight local road with 25 miles per hour posted sign, and in an urban area, and the road was level and dry and non-intersection related with no marked crosswalks, so on and so forth. So basically, typically characteristics you can summarize as noted on the roadside or outside of the traffic way. So dash is basically on the downhill roads and with a posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour, basically standing out. So those results and conclusion has some practical contribution that the traffic engineers can think about what they can do with those roadway with the 35 miles per hour posted speed limit, while there's a downhill road conditions. So this is another, basically the typical crash scenario that we are summarized using text, and later on we are going to build the more detailed scenarios out of it. So the typical scenario for the darting out for the children pedestrians actually involves in a clear daylight, a 1 or 3 years old male child with no impairment darted out into a two-lane undivided local road in an urban area, then struck by a straight going vehicle driven by a 25 to 35 years of old male driver. So this summary is basically a typical scenario that we can derive by using our proposed framework from the crash data to understand the context and what's exactly going on with those typical crash scenarios. So basically, so that is, I have talked a lot, right? So we have done like exhaustive descriptive analysis, statistical analysis, and proposed a framework. And that's not any of the work. There's still, this project is still ongoing. We are also looking at a naturalistic driving study hosted by Mcity to look at, by using the crash data characteristic, can we identify similar scenarios in the natural driving scenario condition on the real roads, so that we can extract the more dynamic parameters from the vehicle side, from the VRU side, so that we can generate models in the virtual environment. So later on for the autonomous vehicle testing, we can actually tune the algorithm of the AVs, for example, their speed, their action, distance. So this is one of the example I want to show you. That my students also sitting in the audience, that they, by looking at natural driving data, so they are able to use to generate the 3D scenarios. And then we can basically, from there, we can also develop some countermeasures to help if those can help reducing the fatal or more injured crashes involving pedestrians as well as the cyclists. So, so study 2 is basically, so the study 1 is sponsored by Toyota CSRC. So study 2 actually is sponsored by CCAT. So the leading PI is my colleague at Mcity, Brian Lin. And so because as I mentioned that I want to do a quiz here. So who can remember what is the #1 fatal crash scenario involving cyclists? Raise your hand. What is that? Yes, you got it. Yes. So we understand overtaking is a really big issue for cyclists. So then we get the CCAT funding to look at more into the overtaking problem. For example, when we design automated vehicles, right, how we can design the algorithm, the control algorithm, and model the mutual behavior from the vehicle side as well as the cyclist. So that's basically the key part of this study. And we do have a poster at this symposium, so I'm going to skip all the details, and I want everybody can take some time to stop by the student poster and give us good ratings. So within that, I want to thank you all for your great attention. It's so wonderful by end of this session. We still have so many people around, not because of there is a dinner afterwards, right? I want to thank all my collaborators and students, especially Rini Shironi from Toyota. Now I can take questions. Thank you. No questions? Well, you got yeah, please. You got to have questions so we can all go to dinner. Not go to dinner until Henry and Debbie will give in the closing remark. So that's very important.
Thanks so much for. Okay. Thanks so much for it's excellent data, really good work. I am curious about any existing efforts or future efforts that you might consider working on regarding infrastructure, especially for cyclists, thinking about a dedicated bike lane, a colored bike lane, patterns of different lane markings and so forth to maybe reduce fatalities or reduce injuries?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So basically, I want to also introduce another colleague of mine, Fred Fong. So he actually, his work, he and I have collaborated on a lot of work, like our previous work actually identified overtaking is very bad for the cyclist. So his research work is more focused on the cycling in terms of the infrastructure, number of lanes, and how we can basically create more dedicated lanes for the cyclist. He actually received, last year he received the NSF Career Award to working on this. If you're interested, I'm happy to share his work with you. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the talk, first of all.
Thank
and you. Second of all, there was a lot of data.
Yes.
And from some of this data, you extracted some patterns. For example, this overtaking for the cyclist, or these vehicles, or the pedestrian jaywalking.
Yes.
I was wondering how, using that data, how close can you replicate the scenario using, say, a simulation, and how much leeway is there? How much unknown do you have to fill in?
Yes, that's a very good question. So basically, in our simulation, first we look at the naturalistic driving data to understand how many lanes are there. Then we have to check also online information in terms of this typical area, what is the length of that lane, so that we can get a relatively accurate replication in the virtual environment. So then we have relatively accurate estimation of the vehicle speed because the sensor are located in the vehicle, and we also have a good radar data in terms of the closing speed between the vehicle and the VRUs. So we are trying our best to basically replicate what's real world going on in the virtual environment. But obviously there are still some conditions. For example, if during the raining condition, it's very hard for us to simulate the raining condition, but we have some solutions like in terms of the braking distance and acceleration rate, stuff like that.
Thank you. So, follow-up question for the sensory equipment and for the trajectory, you can get this information from the.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah, that's why we have different data sets, right? The crash data is just crash data. It has very detailed of like what's going on with the maneuver of the vehicle, what's the consequences, but it does lack the detailed information of the kinematics. So that's why we're looking at the second data sets with the naturalistic driving study data to look at the trajectories.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Lisa Spellman with the SAE Vulnerable Road User Safety Consortium. Nice to meet you in person.
Nice to meet you.
And this was an excellent presentation. I was
Thank you.
sitting in the back with my colleague going, oh, our research is very similar, research findings. So it was great to have it validated by this wonderful team. Mike, I have two questions for you.
Yes.
One is looking at the problems seem to be very similar worldwide. Now, of course, different regions have different infrastructure considerations, societal, but nonetheless, I wonder, are you working with any colleagues elsewhere in the world to see if there are similar findings across data sets? So I wonder about the global. And then my second question is, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the role of standards in the work that you're doing, sort of fit gap kinds of things.
Thank you. Okay, so basically, first the question in terms of like whether I have collaborators outside of maybe Michigan or other. So I did serve on some PhD students work in Sweden. So basically, that student also working from Chalmers University, by the way. They are also working on a similar topic, but look at different perspective. Not because I have to say we are kind of lucky. The U.S. has the most comprehensive crash data in the world. I'm proud to say that. So basically, but they have access to. So they are looking more like using naturalistic driving study to look at that. But so far we do not. We have these type of communications, but we don't have collaborations yet. But I'm looking at Henry back there because he's CCAT just recently renewed. So hoping that we can, and he did include a lot more collaborators from other universities like Wisconsin, Purdue, and Minnesota. Hopefully, we can find some collaborators from those universities and work together on this important topic in the future. Henry.
And then role of standards, or a little bit about.
Oh yes, a global standard. Yes, that's a very good question. So basically, as far as but you may know better than I do in terms of the standards, right? I do not think there is standards in terms of the vehicle, like especially automated vehicle design, right? How they can overtaking the cyclists or the pedestrians. So that's why we're trying to do this research work to understand what's the typical safe edge benefits, right? We can, when we do the modeling, so then we can propose to those standards as well. Even those policymaking people, they can release the guidelines based on all the research findings by this group and other groups. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Gopi Sunela, Ford.
Okay.
Hey, Shanbao, I did meet you before.
Yes.
I saw only 5 minutes of the presentation at the beginning, but what I noticed in there was that most of the pedestrian accidents, you said, were straight, mid-block, and then left turn.
Yeah, that's the, I want to correct, that's the leading fatal crash scenario.
Right.
Yeah.
And generally, when we are looking at use cases, it's always the use case that comes out that creates a lot of the pedestrian accidents is the vehicle right turn, right? That's what it came out. I was wondering what is the missing information there that actually it's not showing the right turn as a contributor in the accident,
Well, it does.
in the fatalities. I don't know if it's fatalities or accidents.
We have both. We have all the information you need, actually. I'm just saying the number one fatal crash scenario is the mid-block jaywalking. However, that does not eliminate the vehicle turning. We actually turning left as well as turning right actually are both problematic. I think I understand why you brought the turning right scenario, because there is assumption that when the driver typically turning right, they typically only looking at their left side while ignoring the probably did not look right side long enough or well enough to notice there is a pedestrian on the right hand side. Am I correct? So that does showing up in the data. But it's just not in terms of statistics. It's not the number one. I maybe can find what's exactly percentage, but I can definitely give you the. It's not showing up because I only show the leading ones, but I definitely can send that to you. Oh, I think it's right here. So going for injury, going straight accounts for 50%. Turning left accounts for 22.5%. Turning right accounts for 10.3%. For fatal crash scenarios, turning right accounts for about 5%, and turning left accounts
Turning
for...
left was much
Yes.
higher.
So
Yeah.
for fatal crashes, turning left is worse.
Okay, got
Turning right is worse than turning left.
Turning right as accidents but not fatalities. Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay, got
yeah.
it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Jan. I forgot that. Thank you. Thank you.